Welcome to an introductory tutorial on conditionals. We're just going to cover the basics on this one. There is a separate tutorial that goes into more depth on logical operators and more complex logic for setting up conditionals. But let's just start with the basics. Before we get started on the coding, there is this README over here where I set up just some brief notes on what equality operators are, what Boolean expressions are. They always evaluate to true or false, what some of the logical operators are that we'll be touching on, and then just the syntax for conditionals. So, and a little bit down here about thinking through, the logic, what the approach is for your problem solving. So if you haven't read this, go ahead and pause the video and take a look because I will be talking about all of this as we do it, but it might help you just understanding some of the concepts and the vocabulary that I'm using if you're not already familiar with it. So let's swap over here to index. We are going to get started with evaluating Boolean expressions, and this is important as a foundation for being able to understand how conditionals work. So let's just do a few basic examples here. Everything in this particular tutorial is not yet coded for you. If you need to pause at any moment, either because I'm going a little bit fast or because you want to try to figure it out yourself before I show you how to do it, feel free to do that as often as you need to. All right. So our instructions here say to code the following expressions and print each result. So we're going to be writing Boolean expressions that should evaluate to either true or false. And we're just going to use a little bit of math to do that. So this first one, 18 minus 3 is greater than 5 plus 8. That's what we're going to write. And we can actually do this all in one line. We can print it and have it evaluated all at the same time. So I'm going to just write console.log. And then inside the parentheses here, what we'll print will be the expression and we'll see the result. So let's go ahead and get started. 18 minus 3 is greater than 5 plus 8. All right, let's run it. And we see that that is true. The next one, 11 is loosely equal to the string 11, the string 11. So if you're not sure what I mean by loosely equal, we can talk about that. There are two ways to do equality, it's straight equality. And if you use 3 equal signs, that's strict equality, which means they have to be the same data type. But loosely equal means you can just use 2 equal signs. And what JavaScript will do is actually evaluate these after converting them to the same data type. So if you have a number and a string, it's going to convert the string to a number and then evaluate it on whether those two things are equal. So we would expect to see that this is actually true because it's going to convert the string first. Yeah, but if this were, if this was strict equality and we run it again, we see that that's false because they're 2 different data types. So that's why it's important to understand the difference between those 2 operators because of the way that JavaScript evaluates that expression. All right, let's do the next one. Console log -4 is less than or equal to 0. -4 is less than or equal to 0. And because we know math, we expect that to be true as well. There we go. And the last one, 5 times 6 is not equal to 10 times 3. And you'll notice I didn't really, specify here whether it's strictly equal or loosely equal, but we always default to strictly equal, particularly if we know that we're already writing something that's going to be the same data type. So 5 times 6 is not equal to 10 times 3. And we expect that to be false, right? And there it is, it's false. Okay, so that's the basics of writing a Boolean expression. You just compare 2 things using one of these equality operators to make that comparison. So Sometimes it might be advantageous to store a Boolean value after evaluating an expression so that you can use that variable later. So let's just kind of take a look at what that looks like. This instruction says, create a variable to strictly compare the number 5 with the string 5, and then print the variable. So I'm going to create this with let num matches string equal. And then I'm just going to put the Boolean expression after this, because this, remember, this is an assignment operator. It's not an equality operator. So we're saying we want num matches string to store the value, and then we're and then we're going to put the Boolean expression that will return that value. So 5 is strictly equal to 5. And as we just discussed, we expect that to be false. But the only way for us to know how that comes out is to actually print the variable to the console. So we can just print num matches string and see what this entire expression right here evaluated to that got stored in that variable. And we see that it's false, just as we expected. Okay, so now we can reassign this variable using loose equality and see what the difference is. So we're going to say now that num matches string is equal to 5 equals string 5. And we would expect this to be true, but of course, I need to be able to print that again to get it to come out in the console so we can see the result. Yeah, and now it's true because we were only comparing them on a loose basis, and it converted this string into a number before making the comparison. Okay, great. So the reason we wanted to take a quick look at the idea of Boolean expressions and evaluating them to true or false is because that's the the foundational thing about setting up conditionals is you have to have a way to say if something is true, then print this code, right? So I've got this whole thing worked out here where I'm going to use an example that is inspired by my childhood. I lived in Central Florida at the time, and there is basically from like December to March, especially closer to March, there are strawberry fields everywhere in Plant City, Florida. And you can actually like go pick them yourself, and it's like the most amazing thing. So there was a local dairy that had a series of convenience stores called the Farm Store at the time. I don't think they exist anymore, sadly, but they had this ice cream called Red Eye ice cream that was absolutely amazing. And so we're going to have this scenario where it's 1988, you're walking home from school and you're majorly craving this Red Eye ice cream, okay? But you're not sure if you have enough cash. So it costs $2.85 for a half gallon. So you're digging around for change, trying to find out if you have enough money. You find 7 quarters, 2 dimes, and a nickel. So we're going to create some variables that represent those, and then we'll actually do some math to figure out if you've got enough money. So we'll say let num quarters equal 7, let num dimes equal 2, and let number of nickels equal 1. Okay. So now we've got that. So let's actually do the math and just put all of that in a variable so that we can have that total handy for comparison. That's going to be easier than having to do this big long expression as many times as we might need it going forward. Because we're going to be using this idea, this total money several times. So I'm going to say, num quarters times 25 cents, number of dimes times 10 cents. And then we'll add the number of nickels times 5 cents, of course. Okay, let me adjust this a little bit. Cool. All right, so now we have this variable that stores the total. If we want to check the value, we can, do a quick console log, cash on hand, and just see what it comes out to. And we see it comes out to $2 even. So we're going to first write a conditional to evaluate if I have enough money, and then we'll print a statement declaring the result either way. Okay, So let's go to here, and this is, setting up a very basic conditional is as simple as just saying if there is some condition is true, and then we'll have some fancy braces here that establish the block of code that would run if that condition is true. And then we're going to do the other case, the opposite case, which is else. And so whatever we put in here, if it evaluates to true, the code here is going to run. But if it evaluates to false, then the code inside here is going to run. So what do we want to say first the condition is? We can say if cash on hand is greater than or equal to 285, because we established up here that it costs 285 for the half gallon. So that's what we're basing it on. We need to know if we have at least that much or more. So we'll say if cash on hand is greater than or equal to 285, then, we'll print some sort of statement that represents this. I might say, I cannot wait to dig into this creamy deliciousness. Okay. Otherwise, if we don't have enough money, we're going to say, bummer. I guess I'm going to have to improvise. Okay. So let's print this out and see which we get. Bummer, I'm going to have to improvise. Okay, so yeah, we only have $2. That is not greater than or equal to 285. Therefore, it skips this block of code completely because this was not true, and it goes to the else block and it executes that code instead. So we never see this because that was not true, but we do see this. So that's how conditionals work. It gives you a way to have two different outcomes or more. We're going to see examples where we can actually have additional outcomes as well. But in this case, we have a binary choice. It's either true or it's false. And that's where, you can just use else. You don't have to put any sort of opposite condition because it automatically just does whatever's left. Okay, if this is not true, then it just moves on to this one. But yeah, this is how we establish logic for JavaScript to evaluate and then execute whatever code we want it to, and not execute code that we don't want it to. It's fundamental to programming. Okay, so let's look at the next part. Red Eye is an amazing blend of, I didn't even tell you what it was. It's vanilla ice cream, Oreos, and strawberries, which, is perfect for Plant City, Florida. It's absolutely delicious. So plain vanilla ice cream, you think is only $2. And you have a stash of Oreos in the freezer at home because frozen Oreos are the best. And this is Plant City in February. So you can go to one of the U-Pick fields and get fresh, plenty of fresh strawberries for only 50 cents. Well, you could in 1988 anyway. There are multiple ways to do this. There really are. And there's also multiple outcomes. So we're just going to kind of take these one at a time first and do it in bits and pieces. And then we'll take a stab at putting it all together, all the different outcomes that we could have. So let's just start with printing a statement if we have enough money for both the ice cream and the strawberries, which would be the ideal outcome. We are going to say if cash on hand, and we have to kind of think about the math here. To do both, if we wanted both the vanilla ice cream and the strawberries, that would be $2 plus $50. So I'm sorry, plus 50 cents. Must be some expensive strawberries, man. Okay, so we will say if cash on hand is greater than or equal. So we'll set it up very similar before, except for now we only need $2.50 instead of $2.85. And we can say, something like, who needs the farm store when I can make my own red eye ice cream at home? Okay. So let's run this and see what happens. And nothing comes out. And we didn't set an else condition, right? In this case, we only had the if. So The idea is if this is true, it'll print this. Otherwise, it's just going to keep going downward and move on and pass it up. So that's enough for now. We're going to keep kind of, doing different scenarios here. So I'm not worried about doing any sort of else yet. So let's ask the question, what if you don't have money for ice cream or strawberries? Let's print a statement that says we're just going to make do with the Oreos at home if we can't afford, the ice cream and strawberries. So we might say if the cash on hand is less than 50 cents, then we would say, console.log. I'm flat broke. Guess I'll just enjoy my Oreos. Okay. And we can run this. And of course, we also know that that's not going to print either because we have $2. Now we can mess around. One of the things you always want to do is you want to test every potential outcome of your code to make sure that it does work if something was true. So we could temporarily do that by changing the value. We could say, cash on hand is now equal to $3 or something like that. And then when we run it, we actually find that, we get the statement. We see it now because this is greater than $2.50. And then we could come down here and change it again and say, cash on hand is now equal to only 25 cents. I have one lone quarter in my pocket. So if I run it again, now I see the expression, I'm flat broke, guess I'll just enjoy my Oreos. So these are ways that you just want to do that just for testing purposes. But, maybe ultimately you still want your code to stand as is. Okay, so next we have this idea of a multiple condition case. We have more than one thing that we have to evaluate to see if something is true and then whether it'll execute the code or not. So it says print a statement if you don't have enough money for vanilla ice cream. So we don't quite have $2, but we do have enough for strawberries. We do have at least 50 cents. So let's set up the conditional. First of all, just say if some condition is true, then here's the code we want to execute. And here we have the two conditions. So we can use this logical operator and because we want to say that both of these things have to be true in order for this to execute. Cash on hand is less than 2 and cash on hand is greater than or equal to 50 cents. So it'll look at this one, say if that's true, then let's move on and check the second one. If that's true, both of them are true, then this entire thing is an expression that evaluates to true because that's how that double ampersand and logical operator works. So then here's the code that we want to execute if that returns true. Let's just say we have, something like no ice cream for me, but some fresh strawberries will be delicious. And you can say this however you want. Alongside my Oreos. Okay. So making the best of the situation. Great. Okay. So those are just some very simple conditionals where we just looked at different, possible cases here. Let's run this one. And it's going to evaluate to false because cash on hand is exactly 2. So this is correct. We don't have enough money for the ice cream. And that's exactly what we wanted to say. If we had exactly 2, we'd be good. So we're going to, in order to test this again, we're going to need to have, and I'm not going to comment it out yet. We'll just change this to say, we only have maybe like $1.50, right? And we'll test it out. Okay, there we go. No ice cream for me, but some fresh strawberries will be delicious alongside my Oreos. And then I'll comment that out because that was just for testing. All right. Let's introduce another condition so we can make this logic a little more complex. What if the strawberry farm was closed and we have the money, but the farm's closed, so we can't buy the strawberries? How would we structure our logic to account for that? So the first thing we need to do is declare a variable to represent that strawberry farm. I'm going to call it let strawberry farm open. And I'm just going to set it to true. We're going to say, default to true. We'll be able to test that. We can always test it with false to see the opposite condition. And the first one says, when you use a variable that's already a Boolean, you don't need to use an equality operator. So we'll see this. We're going to write an if-else statement that prints something different depending on whether the strawberry farm is open or not. So we're actually going to do an if-else in this case. If strawberry farm open. So this is what I say when I say that a variable is already a Boolean. This already evaluates the true by itself. We don't need any sort of equal sign. It's very common for students that are beginning out to do something like equals true, but you don't need to do that because this already evaluates the true or false. So we can just say if strawberry farm open. It will work either way. But in professional practice, you would, keep it simple and not use the equality operator. Woohoo! I can pick some fresh strawberries. They really are amazing, straight from the field, I have to tell you. If you've never had that experience, then take my word for it. All right, now we'll add on this else so we can have the opposite situation and have some sort of statement for that. So we're definitely going to see something either way here. I'll have to come back for strawberries another day. Okay, let's run it. Okay, and we see the first one, which is what we expected because we did set strawberry farm open to true. Woohoo, I can pick some fresh strawberries. If we change it to false and run it again, we see the opposite. I'll have to come back for strawberries another day. So now we've tested both cases out and our code works. Okay, so for this one, we just want to write a statement for the outcome that there's too little money for vanilla ice cream and the strawberry farm is closed. We don't have a way to buy the ice cream. We can't get to the strawberries. So the only thing we have left is our Oreos at home. This is another one where we have multiple conditions. So we're going to want to have that and operator again to make sure that we are proving that both of those things are going to return true in order for the entire thing to be true and to execute the code. So we'll write it like this. If cash on hand is less than 2, if we don't have enough money for the ice cream, and if the strawberry farm is not open. So the way we can do this when we have a Boolean variable is to use the bang operator, the not operator in front of it like this. And that basically says if the strawberry farm is not open. So if this is true, then that not operator is going to make it false. If this was false, this will make it true. So this is kind of how we test it with this type of situation where we want to say if it's false. So we can do that, and then we'll have our statement we're going to print here. And let's see, do I have something I can use that I already wrote? No. Ooh, but I do notice that I accidentally had a negative here instead of a positive. So I'll fix that. I mean, it worked either way, right? With math. Okay, let's come back down. I'm just going to write this one out. So we'll have console.log and then say something like, I'll just have to enjoy my Oreos on their own for today. There we go. Okay. There, got that semicolon on there. Okay, so we can test this right now, but we know that this is going to return false. And actually, this one is too, because we have set this to true, but we know that the opposite of that is false. So it doesn't really matter which one of these triggers this. It'll always look at the first one first. So it's going to look at this and say, do you have less than $2? Well, no, we have exactly $2. So this is actually going to be false, and it's not even going to continue. And so we won't see this print, and we can run it just to prove that. Yeah. So we need to test this, right? And we're going to need to test it with both of those values being changed. So I'm going to say if cash on hand is equal to $1.50, and if strawberry farm open is equal to, false instead of true. And now when I run it, we see our statement because both of those things now evaluate to true. And we can also test the case where, only one of them is going to evaluate to true and the other one's false. So we could do that. And, it's not there because even if this one evaluated to true, this one did not, because it says not true. And then, well, not strawberry farm open and farmer open is true. Okay. I really don't want to confuse you here. And this can be confusing when you're using not with false and or true, but yeah, so now we'll test it the other way. And again, nothing, because in this case, this one right off the bat evaluated a false, so it didn't even continue on. So this part didn't even matter. But we'll just, comment those out. Those were just for testing. So let's move on to this next part. And this kind of last one is where we're going to get a tiny bit more complex. And take a look at how we might write a series of if-else statements where we have more than two possible outcomes. So we want to think about this sequence. Here's some of the criteria. We'll just talk about the criteria first, and then we'll talk about kind of how we want to sequence it. If you can afford both the ice cream and the strawberries, and the farm is open for business, you can make your own version of red eye at home. If you have enough money for the vanilla ice cream, even if you can't afford the strawberries or the farm is closed, you're going to buy it so that you can just make cookies and cream at home. Otherwise, you'll munch on Oreos at home by themselves. Okay, so we're kind of going to be combining some of the different scenarios that we already touched on and doing it all in one sequence. So again, just to look at the structure of this, I'm going to say if this condition is true, then do this. Else if, and then we have the condition, the second condition. And then the final condition, we don't need to actually have an if, because we're basically just saying if neither of those first things are true, then this is what I want you to do. And this will run, and only one of these three is ever going to execute, depending on which condition it hits. If it hits the first one, then it's just going to skip the next two. If it hits this one, that's false, but this one is true, it'll do this one, and then it'll skip the else. And if neither of these are true, then it'll execute this. Okay, so thinking about this, I would say that the way that this has been written out, we can do this in this order. We can kind of start with the largest amount of money that we might have and work our way down, because that way we eliminate everything that is above that number. And then we can be a little bit simpler with the way we set this condition, and we don't have to say some of it again. So it's just a process of elimination. So let's make this clear what I'm talking about. We'll say the largest amount of money that we could possibly need is $2.50. So if cash on hand is $2.50, but we also need to make sure the strawberry farm is open. So we'll say, and strawberry farm open. That means that we have enough money for the vanilla ice cream and the strawberries, and the strawberry farm's open so we can get to them, which means we can make our red eye ice cream at home. So I'll say console.log. Who needs the farm store? Oh, and this is really just the same thing that I already said, isn't it? So I'm just going to copy this. Oops, I think, yep, here we go. Make sure I paste in the right thing. Okay, yeah, so same thing. We don't need the farm store anymore. We don't need to pay $2.89 because we can just make it at home with parts. Okay, with multiple ingredients. Otherwise, let's see, the next condition would be, what if I have enough money for the vanilla ice cream anyway? I'll go ahead and buy it. So then the only thing we really need to check is the cash on hand greater than 2? Now, again, think about this for just a second, and when you're thinking through this logically, if this one had been first, we might have been, maybe we do have $3. This would still evaluate to true, which means this one would never execute. So that's why it was important to actually start with the largest number, so that it would rule out anything greater than $2.50 first. And that means that we don't actually have to say, and cash on hand is less than or equal than, to $2.50, or less than $2.50. We've already established that the cash on hand can't be more than $2.50, because we already did that first. So we can leave this part off and only check if it's greater than 2. So that makes our logic a little simpler, which means it's easier to read and understand. Okay, and then here we say, cool. At least I have enough money to buy the vanilla ice cream. I can make cookies and cream. Ice cream, which is a pretty good deal. All right. Otherwise, if there is not enough money for ice cream and strawberries, if there's not enough money for just ice cream, then we can't afford either one. Then the last thing is just to enjoy our Oreos. And again, I know I already have this one, so I will grab this and just paste that in there. Okay, so let's test our code here and make sure that everything is what we expect it to be. And I'm going to actually I'm going to test it backwards. So I'm going to just temporarily right here say cash on hand is let's just say it's again 25 cents, like we did before. It's not enough for either one, so we're going to make sure that it bypasses either of these, because these return false, and prints this one. Yeah, I guess I'll just have to enjoy my Oreos on their own for today. And so, remember right now we have Strawberry Farm open is true, which means, this one is still returning false. So we're not seeing this, we're actually seeing this one. Okay, let's change this to be, actually, we don't need to change anything, because we already know that we have exactly $2. So let's run it again. Yeah, and now we see the second one come out, because this is evaluating the true, even if this didn't. So cool, I have enough money to buy the vanilla ice cream and make cookies and cream at home. So the last one would be to reactivate this for testing and say, I have $3. And now we see the very first one again. Who needs the farm store when I can make my own red ice cream? Because now we hit this first condition. This was true and this was true. But we can see that if we were to change Strawberry Farm Open to false, then this one no longer resolves to true, because only one of these two things is true and not both. So that's where it skips this one and then gets to this one and says, okay, you have more than $2. So even if you can't get strawberries, you can get the vanilla ice cream. So that's, there's lots of different ways to do this. And I'm gonna just do like that to put it back to the way it was. And I just would say that if you ever find yourself at Ted Drew's in St. Louis and you get a custom concrete, try out the strawberries and Oreos, because it really is amazing. That's pretty much what I have always gotten when I went there. So I hope this has been helpful and just helping you understand the basics of conditionals. And you can continue on with the next tutorial to learn a little bit more and understand how to do nested conditionals, which is often something that comes up, especially the more you learn. you're going to come into lots of situations where you're probably going to want to do a nested conditional. So I encourage you to do that. All right. Thank you very much for joining me for this.